Aloha mai kako. I'm going to add to my introduction a little later, and I was expecting to have Tiale here. No offense, right? I guess
None taken.
moderator in all things except for our session, I guess. But in this presentation, I'll focus on key Hawaiian concepts and relate them to sustainability and explain how we're seeking to integrate Hawaiian culture and sustainability in our curriculum. And my approach is often more circular, so I've actually written down my comments and I'll try to stick to them as compared to linear. But again, Hawaiian concepts, sustainability, and curriculum. And I'll start by talking about this basic concept of aloha, how I greeted you, which is a well-known greeting, a well-known vernacularly term that is used all the time in a commercial, touristic, but also an everyday manner. And there's even a song, A-L-O-H-A, a little aloha in our day. And the chorus goes, and aloha means hello, and aloha means goodbye, and aloha means I love you. I like to, and that's pretty well known, but I like to emphasize with my students this well-known olelo no eau, or Hawaiian proverb, a wise saying, "A'ohe pau ka ike ka halau ho'okahi," which is not all knowledge is found in one school. And in my teaching, I like to emphasize the multiplicity of meanings that words can have, and context matters. And so that we used to have two locally based airlines in Hawaii. Does anyone, maybe we can make this active? What are the two? One's still with us, the other one went bankrupt. Anyone know the two airlines? Yeah, so and actually Hawaii's being bought up by Alaska, right? Mm-hmm. So that's interesting, see how that play out. But so one is Hawaiian, and Mokulele is like for smaller, but that was competing directly with yeah, Aloha. And how many of you have flown Aloha Airlines ever? Right, it went bankrupt, right? And so for some Hawaiians, for some Kanaka Maoli, for some Native Hawaiians, the concept of aloha is bankrupt. Yeah, just like the airline, which is to say, and with Hawaiian going, we'll see, but I've been saying for a while, well, Hawaiians, we're still here, but to some, aloha is bankrupt. Does that make sense? It's so commercialized, commodified, cellophane, plastic, mass-produced, that it's become meaningless. Again, words can have a multiplicity of meanings. I'm going to stick to that, and the multiplicity of meanings. And I did greet you with aloha, and I did want to mention that if you break down the word, and this is fairly well known here, but something I really appreciate about this conference, and I should have said that to mahalo, to extend gratitude to the organizers of the organization, which is a mouthful, right? International Forum on Education, is that right? And then the ICE is International Conference on Education. But I do like the three I's, that it's international, intercultural, and interdisciplinary. And we come from a campus that's quite international and intercultural. And I think this panel, I think we can definitely work on being more interdisciplinary. I mean, across our campus, but I think that's true of a lot of campuses, which are often siloed, and we're often super specialized and have a hard time crossing into disciplinary boundaries. But anyway, so I'll emphasize the deep indigenous or origins of the term alo, as in face-to-face, and ha having to do with the breath of life. And so if you have an intimate exchange of the breath of life, that is a much deeper meaning than just hello and goodbye, right? Having said that, I'm open to a multiplicity of meanings in different contexts. Another key concept related to aloha is the concept of aina, which is often translated simply as land. And I'm following the work of Manu Myers, a Native Hawaiian scholar, and others, that aina is that which feeds. The I is to eat, the na makes it plural, And so that's actually the real reason I came to this conference, because of the dinner tonight, right? Because Aina is that which feeds. Okay, so good. So anyway, and so if we think about the Aina as extending into the ocean, I'm going to try to, as we will in this presentation, not only link culture and science, but also land and sea into an integrated whole. And so then that leads to putting those two words together, again, well known in the Hawaiian context, but I see we do have international audience. So aloha aina, putting those together simply would be translated as love of the land. But that term aloha aina perhaps has always been political, at least back to 130 years ago or so, give or take, with the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom and its later annexation. So aloha aina in that context, till today, is very politicized, having to do with both the connection between people and place, but also the disconnects, right? I should have, and this is where I'll go into my academic background. My undergraduate degree was in history and Pacific Island studies at Brigham Young University, Hawaii, where I now teach. My master's in cultural geography at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. And then my PhD is in cultural geography from the University of Hawaii at Mānoa here. And I also did graduate certificates in both Pacific studies and cultural studies. So all of the training informs my thinking. And so if you put aloha aina together in that context, and I believe culture is always political, but especially 130 years ago, it had to do with the displacement and dispossession, the alienation of Hawaiian people from both sovereignty and the land. Fast forward to our recent Mauna Kea protests, that has to do with aloha aina, some protests in my home community, in Kahuku in particular, aloha aina. And actually, aloha aina is informing the way we're thinking, we collectively should be thinking about the rebuilding of Lahaina, right? And what that's going to look like moving forward. So having said that, so if you put those two together, aloha aina, it's much more than just love of the land. Okay, and with that in mind, with that context, then I'm gonna do oli, or a chant. A oli to chant is a very basic traditional Hawaiian practice, and this oli is, I'll explain it later, but it does come from, it will situate myself in the community where I was born and raised, but also situate us at BYU Hawaii and Laie. Lele lani loa ua mali e, ke hoe a ela, e ka moa e, ahu kai ina pali, kai ko o lalo e, ua pi kai, iau kai e. No need to applause. I mean, for real. That's, yeah. I'd rather that be less of a performance, more of a linkage between me and the place I was born and raised, the place where we live and teach. And actually, so this, if you're familiar with, I think most people are familiar with Pele, right? In the Hawaiian context, soccer star, right? The GOAT. Okay, just kidding. No, right? So Pele, the volcano goddess, right? And some are familiar with Hi'iaka, her sister, right? And with the story when Pele on Hawaii Island, Big Island, sends Hi'iaka to find her love interest on the other side of the island chain. And so if you're familiar with that story, as Hi'iaka, Pele's sister, comes to the island of Oahu, there's a well-known battle she has with a mo'o, or lizard, giant lizard, dragon-like creature in the area of Kualoa. And she slays the dragon, the mo'o, and the tail is cut off and thrown into the ocean. And that's found in the landscape in Kaneohe Bay as what's often vernacularly called Chinaman's hat, but the actual name is Mokuli'i. So that's a fairly well-known story. Less well-known is that when Hi'iaka came down to our neighborhood, in the place between Hau'ula, where I was born and raised, and Laie, and they were part of the same community, at Kokolulu, at this beach. I better use the clicker. Okay. This is about where Hiaka chants to Laniloa, which is the point there, which is now known Laie Point, but the original name is Laniloa, which was also one of these giant mo'o. And this chant, though, she's not slaying the mo'o, she's actually honoring it through chant. And I think this chant highlights some bigger concepts in relation to the relationship between Kanaka Maoli Native Hawaiian people and the land and the landscape. As noted, Kumuhula and Kupuna from Hau'ula, Uncle Cy Bridges, some of you might know him. He'll continue to say that a genealogy of the land is a genealogy of the people. It also speaks to this idea that the land is like family. And as we jump forward to this idea of sustainability, how different would the world be if humanity treated this earth like family, right? So from a Kanaka Maoli perspective, yeah, the land is like family, right? And surely we'd be much more sustainable if that was the thinking globally. Okay, and by the way, so we have that concept of aina, and I wish I came up with this. I didn't, I can't claim that. But in the middle of the word sustainability is aina, right? So you can't think about sustainability without thinking of the land, of course, without thinking of the ocean as well, because it's all integrated. All right. And so, and by the way, I joke with my students, I always say, well, it's not surprising that Jason Momoa is Aquaman. So you might have heard of Jason Momoa and Aquaman, right? And they say, why? Well, I'm not an expert on every culture on the planet, but I think you'd be hard put to find a culture and people and society more into the ocean, which is to say we sailed the ocean, fished it, we farmed it with fish ponds in this ingenious system of food production. And then we play in it and surfing. And there's lots of mo'olelo, there's so much into the ocean. So it's like ingrained. So you can't talk about the aina without talking about the ocean and all of these connections. And so having said that, and I don't have time for that story. How am I doing this? Good. On the time? Okay, wait, this one maybe. Yeah. So going up mountain as a chant, or towards the mountains, the chant ends talking about going towards the mountain. With the sea spray going up toward the mountain. If you look at the land from the sea, the crop for Hawaiian people, the plant, the family member, the older sibling, is kalo or the taro in English. Yeah. And so at this point, I'd like to cite the work of French Pacific geographer Joel Beaumaison and his book, The Tree and the Canoe. So and in this book, he makes the point that Pacific people are both rooted in the land, but also routed through the ocean. And similar to, if you're familiar with American anthropologist James Clifford work on routes, right? The way roots and routes. So from a Kanaka Maoli perspective, Hawaiians are rooted in land, like family, but also we're rooted or routed through the ocean, right? So roots and routes. And so to jump ahead to before I jump there, so something that we're striving to do at UAE Hawaii in our Hawaiian Studies program, but more broadly on our campus with our new president and vice president, trying to emphasize sustainability across the curriculum. That's something we're trying to do for our program in Hawaiian Studies. We have Kua'ola, which is the name of our cultural garden. Kahua is the foundation and Ola is life. And so we have our cultural garden. This is a good example of how curriculum should be integrated. This is our third year upper division Hawaiian language class, working in the lo'i, working in the lo'i with kalo and integrating that into our curriculum. So we have our garden, and I'm not good with time, so I've probably taken too much time, sorry. Oh. So, and this is a good lead into the next group of presenters, actually. So I'm just going to be brief on this. We also have our wa'akaulua, or our double-hulled voyaging canoe, named Iosepa, as part of our curriculum. And the next presenters will be talking about Hokulea, the ancestor of modern voyaging. But so our canoe, Iosepa, has been a part of our curriculum, part of our program. And so with our kalo, we're rooted. With our va'a, our canoe, we're routed through land and sea. And actually, so I'm going to turn the time over quickly. And we're talking, and I was asking Esprit, how, what are your kids up to? And her twin daughters are paddling canoes. Yeah. In fact, she was just saying earlier that she'd rather them be paddling. I mean, they'd rather be paddling than joining her here. But she was saying, so the first thing you learn when you're paddling outrigger canoes is the huli drill, right? When the canoe overturns, you need to know how to turn it. And in my own dissertation research on the west side of this island, with Ka'ala Farm, a environmental and cultural organization, we had gardens growing kalo up Mauka, and we were working with kids on the ocean in canoes. And so I like that metaphor of huli, to right your canoe. For Hawaiian people, that's what we're trying to do as we engage with our culture and our ancestors and the land, and to look towards sustainability to right our canoe. And huli also means to turn. So I'm going to turn the time over to you, Esprit.
Thank you. So the canoe is really important in the Hawaiian culture. It allows you to travel, go from place to place, explore, but also go out and fish, gather food for your family. One of the things that I find really interesting is not only did Hawaiians use these big sailing canoes to get to the island, but so did everything else that we find on this island. It had to either get here through a canoe, people brought it, a raft, so debris floating on, and so something riding on the raft, something using underneath like a seaweed mat as sanctuary, and it just follows the currents, getting blown here, drifting here. Everything had to come here via some kind of canoe. So Hawaii is a hotspot. So it's a series of volcanoes that have erupted. There's nothing, it's just rock. Everything had to come here, even dirt. So the volcanoes, rocks being eroded, we're starting to get big rocks turning into smaller rocks, turning into even smaller rocks, dust being blown here. Everything got here some kind of way. There's nothing that originally started here. However, we do see animals, we do see life starting to come to the Hawaiian Islands. And these are things that are very robust. And because of the placement of where the Hawaiian Islands are, if you flew here, you know how very far away it is from everything. Everything had to come here via a journey. And these are going to be only the very hardiest animals that make it here. When you look at animals in the Hawaiian Islands and you look at, say, animals, off the coast of Florida and the Caribbean, we do see things like the same kinds of coral, the same kinds of fish. But our animals here are a little bit different in that things like our coral are much slower growing. It's because that coral larva managed to stay coral larva longer. So just by happenstance, we're longer, spend a longer time in the planktons, we're slower growing, able to make it all the way over here. And happened to settle. If it was a fast growing, if it stayed juvenile, stayed a larva for a long time, it would have fallen out of the plankton and died. Okay. And that's with a lot of our animals, slow to mature. Not only did it take this great voyage for our animals to get here, but also you needed to bring a mate with you, and you needed to find that mate. So you can imagine how many animals made it here, how many organisms made it here, but didn't find a conspecific, a species that it could mate with to propagate. And so we're very, or at least I'm very proud of our animals that made it here, and not only made it here, but flourished. And this thing that was a rock that came from the ocean was able to flourish, thrive, and then for a lot of them, have accumulated enough changes over time that we now have species that are endemic to the Hawaiian Islands. Things like the Hawaiian green sea turtle. Did you know that they're the largest hard-shell sea turtle in the world? They're also the only sea turtle where the males also come to the beach to rest. So I think the Hawaiian island atmosphere is pervasive among at least humans and sea turtles. So we just like to lay on the beach. We have a lot of different corals, different invertebrates, birds that we only find here in the islands. And they all share these characteristics, kind of slower to mature, a little bit more hardy in terms of how they got here. Some of those characteristics have been lost. But focusing on our coral reefs, those characteristics have maintained. So if you look at coral in the Caribbean, they can grow about, on average, about 4 centimeters a year, some of them up to 10 centimeters a year. Our coral here in Hawaii, it's about 1 or 2 centimeters a year. So much slower in terms of growth. However, like their sisters in the Caribbean, they die just as fast. They're not slower at dying. They do die at the same rate. And so with things like the destruction of reefs, ocean acidification, climate change, we do see some problems with the reefs here in Hawaii, because they're dying at the same rate, but they're not growing at the same rate. So this is a challenge in terms of restoration. How are we going to save our reefs and the animals that are on our reefs that are now endemic to the island? Well, there was this kind of eureka moment. There was a lab that was growing some coral, and as the story goes, it's probably a grad student, was handling some coral, dropped it, panicked, picked up the little pieces. It shattered when it fell, picked up the little pieces, put it back in the pool where they were growing some coral, and hoped that nobody would notice. Yeah, so definitely a grad student. Over time, though, notice that these little pieces were growing exponentially fast compared to the larger pieces, and thus born microfragmentation. So just like human babies grow really fast in their first year when they're small, growing fast, we see the same thing with coral. When it's small, it grows really fast until it reaches a certain stage, and then growth slows down. And so we see that in our coral here in Hawaii, and corals around the world. So one of the things that scientists are now trying to do, so we see coral dying, coral that's maybe been broken off. We call these corals of opportunity. Coral that's maybe been broken off by somebody walking on the reef. You're snorkeling, you struggle, you get a mouthful of water, you stand up, you break a coral. Not you guys, but the other tourists. Your boat runs aground, whatnot. Storms break off parts of the coral. Coral that's tumbling around, that the sand hasn't quite eroded all the tissue. We call these corals of opportunity. Scientists, we're taking these corals of opportunity and we're cutting them. So you could see here where they're being cut by a diamond blade. We cut them into small fragments and we glue them to these bigger concrete structures, pyramids. The pyramid shape they found works really well here with the kind of weight. Place them on tables and flat surfaces. Here it's the pyramid shape. It physics, trust me, it deflects the waves the best. So glue these pieces. So now you have a coral. You can see the size of the coral. We've cut into small pieces. We've now glued it onto a pyramid. And over time, so in about a year, we can get those pieces then to grow back to heal. This coral is kind of healing itself together. And now we have, within a year, a coral piece that had been broken off, would have died in the next week or so. Now we have about a foot by a foot pyramid of coral. So why does this matter? Well, we know that coral reefs take things like CO2. We know that coral reefs act as things like nurseries for other animals. And so by doing this, maybe this is the way to save coral reefs, particularly Hawaiian coral reefs that are slow growing. Maybe we could trick them into growing faster, put out larger coral mounds, and kind of replace the ones that are lost. Sounds great. Sounds great. We did it. The end. It's not quite so easy. So let me tell you about another research project that we're working on. So in red, this is Laie Bay. I don't know how much you could see. So we have Laie Bay surrounded in red. The blue is the water, the streets, those are on the land. If you could see what we're seeing, there's some brown spots. The brown spots are coral reef. Some of it's alive, some of it's not. And what I can tell you about Laie Bay is that the live coral is not very dense. It's not packed in here. Similar to this room, you guys are not very densely placed. In blue, this is over by Hauula, so about 6 miles down the road. The reef here, there's not a lot of ocean. It's more densely packed with coral. It's not as damaged, this coral here. It's still damaged. It still needs help. Please don't walk on it. But it's not as damaged. One of the things that we've seen between these two reefs, the red and the blue, is that the one that's in blue, we've been monitoring it for about 4 years now, will spawn. Every summer we have spawning. The one in red, we do not see spawning. Maybe one time for an hour. I wasn't there. My students got really excited and sent me a bunch of texts. We took some DNA samples. We haven't analyzed them yet. So maybe once in 4 years for an hour. Probably a nudibranch and not the coral, but it was late. I didn't want to tell them. So we'll see. So there's something about density that also causes corals to spawn or not spawn is what we're thinking. So even if we are replacing the coral that has been lost, the goal is to not do this forever, right? Sometime the funding is going to dry up. People are going to graduate. People are going to move on. So these projects cannot be an indefinite thing. The goal is to get these reefs back to where they were so that they can then spawn on their own and help rebuild themselves. That's the answer. Maybe if we can just plant more corals here in the red than in the blue, and then we can get them to both spawn. Sounds great. Although, again, it's not so easy. So just like if you are looking for a mate, there are certain places you're going to go, certain places you're not going to go. Family reunion? No. Bar? Maybe. Home Depot? Yeah, no. So the coral is the same way. They're able to recognize self versus not self. They can tell self. This is why microfragmentation and gluing it back onto the pyramid is so successful. They can recognize all these bits and pieces as self so they can grow together. If you would glue parts of a coral that were not from the same coral nub, both on that pyramid, they would fight. One of them would end up winning, and now you've wasted part of a coral on the other side of the pyramid. They can recognize self versus not self. So when we're doing these outplanting, there's a little bit more thought that needs to go into where are we planting, who are we planting by whom, and density. What is that max density where then we could say, okay, you're on your own, start spawning, and we're going to go spend our efforts on another side of the island. So this is kind of the struggle that we're looking at when we're trying to say, can we save reefs? Can we bring reefs back? Can we keep them from totally disintegrating? So right now, the reef in red is not spawning. So do we even spend time, effort, energy, money in restoring this? If we look at the Hawaiian tradition, there in the history, it says that parts of the sea on the North Shore are 6 seas. And so here at least from a scientific perspective, we're thinking we've done, the man has come in and ruined the reefs. And I think certainly, we haven't done a lot to help them. In the past, but at what point do we restore? And so not only are we using we've learned what we know to move forward and help with restoration, but it's really important to look back and say, what culturally, what knowledge is there in this area that we're wanting to help restore, that we're wanting to bring back? And what was it like before? This idea of what it was like before, what it should be, but what if it never was? Can we ever get it back to what if it ever was? If this was a 6C, and by 6C, I don't know what that means. I'm not going to pretend to know what that means. But we also have really like great swell during the winter on our side, and big waves with little coral. They don't mix; it breaks them off. And so we see that a lot of our coral on our side of the island can only get so high. If it gets taller than that, the waves break it off. And so maybe that's what it means. I'm not sure. But I do know that we shouldn't just give up, that there's a lot of animals that rely on our coral reefs. So like our Hawaiian blue coral that's endemic to the island. I have another student that's working on Sarcothela edmondsoni, and she's found that actually this one coral that we're calling Sarcothela edmondsoni, there's actually 6 species. They've been calling it the same thing forever. And it turns out genetically, 6 different species is what we can tell. This is a soft coral that if its habitat's destroyed, it goes extinct. There's no evidence left. It's soft, it's squishy, like broccoli that's cooked too long. There's no fossil evidence that's going to be left. And so now we've lost not only Sarcothela edmondsoni, but these other species that we never even knew about. It's lost to time. There's no record. Things like this red upside down sea anemone, middle right, that's man sea anemone. This one's endemic to the North Shore of Oahu. We have sea cucumbers, sea fans, pencil urchins, fish, a lot of animals reliant on our coral reefs that are more or less the silent victims of this coral reef destruction. We might not even have record of what's there. And if we don't put efforts into saving and sustaining the reefs that we have, we would never know. We would never know is there. So if you have time here and you get to do a little bit of snorkeling, take lots of pictures. That might be the only one ever. But there's a lot out there that we don't know about. Fish coming and going seasonally. I don't know how many of you guys have heard about our orca pod that comes every once in a while. We have some transit orcas that swim through the islands. We're not 100% sure where they go. They just show up every couple of years. Everybody's excited, and then they swim on. Where they go, I don't know. But last year, a new species of within that orca family, Delphinidae, was described. If you think that all the big animals have been described, okay, whatever. Coral, it's small, maybe. But all the big animals have been described. No, there's still animals out there that we don't even know. And it just takes somebody who's interested enough to watch and learn and ask questions and look at what's been done culturally and scientifically to put it together to understand that there's more out there. And we just need people to be attentive and record. So with that, I encourage you, go take pictures, go outside. It's hot sometimes. Weather's not always great, but go outside. That's what I tell my students. It's the weekend. Don't do work. Go outside. That's your homework. All right. If you guys have any questions, I don't know what our time is, but if you have any questions, we'd love to answer them in any way that we can.
Oh, thank you both. That was really interesting. My question is very simple, I think. If you put those 6 species that you thought were one together on the pyramid, would they fight with each other? And what does that look like when coral fights?
Ooh. Okay, so when you're in your hotel room tonight, Google coral fighting. Anemones fight the same way. It's slow but dramatic. Yeah. So what's interesting is that for the soft coral, we find them in different environments. And so it's thought that they look different just because of the environments, but genetically they're different. They're different too. So we do think they would fight. They would fight. And what coral looks like, anemones are the same way, is that they swell up one part. So if I'm an anemone They swell up one side. So I'm taking water to swell up, and I'm going to reach my tentacle over, and I'm going to essentially slap part of me, leave a skin graft, if you will, on my neighbor. That hurts. You know, I don't know if you've ever been stung by a jellyfish. Coral and anemones are in the same family.
Oh.
So more or less, I'm going to sting this other person, this other coral. They're going to get all slimy, try to take that skin graft off, try to get those nidae off, and then they're going to turn around and slap you back. And so essentially, when you're out snorkeling or Pacific Northwest of the United States, if you look in the title, you see some really defined areas between anemone clones, where it's essentially a tentacle length between these groups. So it's a lot of back and forth until somebody wins. That polyp dies, then the coral that won gets to grow, one polyp more in the direction of the loser. Yeah.
That's good.
Aren't you glad you asked?
That was a great.
Google it. If we had ChatGPT, you could ask. I'll probably tell you something else. No.
So, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. My question is the growth of the corals halted because of the ocean acidification. So these are the small islands, Hawaiian archipelago are small islands. So what kind of anthropogenic reasons behind this ocean acidification?
So what's driving ocean acidification?
Yeah.
So research suggests that it's the greenhouse gases. So the CO2 needs to be absorbed somewhere. We are a blue planet, mostly ocean. It gets absorbed by the water. And the water becomes a little bit acidic. You can actually do this experiment at home. I do it with my students, and they are always amazed. Where you take a cup of water, measure the pH of just water from the tap, and then you blow bubbles into it for about 2 minutes. Have them sit down before you do this. Blow bubbles for about 2 minutes, measure the pH, and the pH is already a little bit more acidic. And so essentially the same thing's happening to the oceans. In terms of coral reefs, the acid eats away at their calcium carbonate skeleton. So now they're naked. They don't have that protection. You can't have these big coral mounds. There's some evidence that some coral will be okay naked, just like some people, I guess, but a lot of people and a lot of coral, not so much. And so they would not be able to thrive. And if you don't have these big coral mounds, now you don't have places for little fishies to hide, and you don't have, little Galatheid crabs to hide in. And it's just this dominoes effect that the acidification causes. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. So
Hi. My question is for the first presenter. I am also an Indigenous educator, so I'm curious about what's happening in the schools in terms of connection to the land and things that students can experience to keep, culture and language in Hawaii.
Sure. I think the short answer is a lot more now than in the past. And I have a colleague, Brandon Ledward, who wrote an article, based learning. So there's, service learning, project-based learning, like getting outdoor. I mean, more broadly, right? Not just for Hawaiian or Indigenous people. It's good for humanity to get outside and do these kind of things. But certainly for Kanaka Maoli, there's much more than when we were in school. And it's actually, it's very, I think the challenge is to get the students off of the devices, right? I think that's not but maybe if they use AI to do all their papers, they have more time to get out. No, but I do believe that's a challenge. I think there's so many more opportunities for my children and this generation. One article I wrote talked about the different generations. There's much more available and so many programs and opportunities that I think in some ways this generation is spoiled because they have two other editions. But I think, that would be the short answer, much more than in the past. And it's a good thing. Yeah.
All right. I want to thank the panel for excellent presentation.